There is an event described in Scripture that was supposed to arrive before all the others, not alongside them, not among them, before them. A single global condition that had to be satisfied first, or nothing else in the prophecy could function the way it was written. And for nearly 2,000 years, the church has been searching for it in the wrong place entirely. Here is what should unsettle you. Every generation of believers since the first century has looked up at war, at hunger, at the ground shaking beneath their feet, and every one of them said the same three words: "It is here." They said it with tears. They said it with certainty. They sold what they owned. They climbed hills and waited, and every single one of them was wrong. Not slightly wrong, completely wrong. 19 centuries of sincere praying, Bible-reading people, reading the same passage you have read, reaching the same conclusion, and being buried before it came true. That should terrify you for a reason most people never articulate. Because if they were wrong and they had the same text you have, then the possibility that you are wrong right now is not remote. It is the historical default. But they did not fail because they were foolish. They failed for a reason that is specific, identifiable, and written directly into the passage they were reading. They failed because they were measuring the wrong thing. And what most translations quietly flatten out of the text is the very word that tells you what to measure instead. The words come from a hillside east of Jerusalem, spoken as the sun went down over a temple that had less than 40 years left to stand. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains. Notice what the text does not say. It does not say the wars will be larger. It does not say the famines will be deeper, or that the earth will shake harder than it ever has. Read it again slowly, and you will find that Jesus never made a claim about intensity at all. Every generation that failed made intensity the test. The text was pointing at something else entirely, something hidden beneath the surface of a phrase so small that most readers slide right past it. And here is where this stops being ancient history and becomes something about the room you are sitting in. The condition that passage requires, the actual condition, the one written in the original language, was physically impossible to satisfy for 1900 years. Not unlikely, not rare, impossible. It could not have happened in the 1st century or the 5th or the 15th or in your great-grandfather's lifetime, no matter how much war or hunger or ruin those centuries contained. The mechanism did not exist. Every generation that waited was waiting for something that could not have arrived because the world itself was not yet shaped in a way that would let it arrive. That shape changed, not slowly and not long ago. It changed within living memory, and it changed so completely that we stopped noticing it, the way you stop noticing air. Consider the implications. The first sign was never the disaster. The first sign is how the disaster is being seen. And the moment that sentence lands, the entire chapter reorganizes itself in front of you. But the verse that proves it is not in Matthew. It sits in a different book, written decades later by an old man, exiled on a rock in the sea, describing something he had no earthly way to imagine. A scene that commentators for 19 centuries were forced to call symbolic, because reading it literally would have required a machine that would not exist for another 1800 years. They were not being unfaithful to the text. They were being honest about physics. That excuse is gone. And what that verse actually describes, once you can finally read it plainly, is not what you are bracing for. Because the word Jesus chose on that hillside, the word every English Bible translates correctly and almost every listener misunderstands completely, was never a word about death. It was a word about birth. If you want to see where this goes, take 1 second right now and subscribe to God Revealed and hit that like button before you go any further. It genuinely helps this message reach the people who need it, and there is a great deal more here than anyone expects. To understand what was actually said, you have to stand where they were standing. It is the final week. The air over Jerusalem is thick with roasting meat and dust and the sound of hundreds of thousands of pilgrims packed into a city built for a fraction of them. Jesus has just walked out of the temple courts for the last time, and something in the way he walked out has left the disciples uneasy. He has just finished speaking words over that city that no one in the group has fully processed yet. Your house is left to you desolate. And then they do what people do when the silence becomes unbearable. They change the subject to something safe, something beautiful. They point at the building. You have to understand what they were pointing at. Herod's temple was not merely a religious structure. It was the single most impressive construction project in the eastern half of the known world, and it had been under continuous work for almost 50 years. Some of the foundation stones were the length of a modern bus and weighed hundreds of tons, cut so precisely that a blade could not slide between them. The facade was plated in gold, and ancient writers record that when the morning sun struck it, travelers approaching from the east had to look away. It was engineered to be permanent. It was the physical, architectural argument that God was not going anywhere. The disciples are Galileans, countrymen. They are pointing at it the way a man points at a mountain. And Jesus looks at the most permanent object in their world and tells them that not one stone will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down. Then he walks east, down through the valley, up the slope of the Mount of Olives, and he sits. Understand the geography, because the geography is the whole scene. From that ridge, the temple sits directly across from you, below eye level, fully exposed, glowing in the late sun. He sits down facing the thing he just condemned. And the disciples come to him privately. They ask their question, and here is where 19 centuries of confusion are born. Tell us, they say, when will these things happen, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Read that again. They asked it as a single question. In their minds, the temple falling, the Messiah arriving, and the age ending were one event, welded together, indivisible. Of course they thought that. In every framework they had inherited, the destruction of that building could only mean the end of everything. The idea that the temple could fall and the world could simply keep going, that history could continue for centuries afterward, ordinary and unremarkable, was not a possibility their theology had a shelf for. So they asked about one event. And Jesus answered about layers. This is the interpretive fork in the road, and it is worth being honest about how scholars have handled it, because they have not agreed. Some argue the entire discourse was fulfilled in the 1st century, sealed shut in the year 70, when Roman legions took the city and the temple burned so hot that the gold ran into the seams of the stones, and soldiers pried the blocks apart to get it, leaving quite literally not one stone upon another. Others propose the opposite, that the whole discourse remains ahead of us, that the 1st century was rehearsal and nothing more. Both camps read the same Greek. Both have serious scholars. Both can point to verses that seem to close the case. But when we examine the structure of the answer itself, a third reading emerges that neither camp fully accounts for. Because Jesus does something in his reply that only makes sense if he is doing something other than answering the question he was asked. He does not begin with a date. He does not begin with a sign. He begins with a warning about interpretation. Watch out that no one deceives you. That is the first sentence out of his mouth. Before a single prophetic detail, before wars, before famines, before anything, the opening move is a warning that people will read these events incorrectly. And then he starts naming things, false messiahs, wars, rumors of wars, and immediately does something almost no one notices. He tells them what those things are not. See to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Sit with that for a moment. He names war, and then he says, that is not it. He names rumors of war, And then he says, do not be alarmed. He is not building a checklist. He is dismantling one. He is taking the very things every future generation will point at and screaming at them across 2,000 years. This is not the sign. Stop looking at this. The literary structure itself reveals the intent. This is not a calendar. It is a diagnosis. And that distinction changes everything about how the passage functions. A calendar tells you when. A diagnosis tells you what is happening inside the body, the underlying condition that the symptoms are merely evidence of. A physician does not diagnose by the loudness of a cough. A cough can mean nothing at all. The physician diagnoses by the pattern, the combination, the sequence, and above all by the timing, which symptoms appear together, and what that convergence indicates about a process that is already underway beneath the skin, invisible, irreversible, and progressing whether the patient believes in it or not. Jesus was not handing his disciples a schedule for the end of the world. He was handing them a set of clinical signs and telling them how to read a body. And every generation that came after took that diagnosis and tried to use it as a calendar. They took the symptoms and asked when. The text was answering what, which raises a question the disciples never thought to ask, sitting there on that hillside with the gold of the temple burning in their eyes. If this is a diagnosis, then the symptoms are not random. Diagnoses have order. Something always presents first. The sign that tells the physician the process has actually begun, as opposed to the 1,000 ordinary aches that mean nothing at all. Jesus named that first symptom. He named it deliberately, and he named it before the rest. And he named it in a way that guaranteed nobody would recognize it for 1,900 years. Now let me give the strongest possible argument against everything this video is about. Because if it cannot survive the objection, it does not deserve your attention. The objection goes like this, and it is not stupid. It is devastating. Wars have always existed. There has never been a century, never been a decade, never been a year of recorded human history without organized killing somewhere on this planet. Famine has always existed. Hunger is older than agriculture. And earthquakes. The earth has been shaking since before there was anyone standing on it to feel it. The plates beneath your feet have been grinding for hundreds of millions of years, and they were grinding when the words of that discourse were still warm in the air. So how could any of that possibly be a sign of anything? A sign has to distinguish. A sign has to mark one moment apart from every other moment. If a thing is always true, it can never signal that something has changed. Point at war as evidence, and a Roman could point back. Point at famine, and a medieval peasant could point back, and he would win, because he watched a third of the people he knew die in a single season. Point at the ground shaking, and every generation in recorded history raises its hand. The skeptic is right, completely, unanswerably right, and that is exactly why he misses the sign. Because here is what should stop you cold. Jesus made the same objection first. 2,000 years before any critic thought of it, he said it out loud, and he said it about his own list. See to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. He named wars and disqualified them in the same breath. He is not offering these as proof. He is preemptively removing them from evidence. He is saying, in effect, you will see these things, and your heart will leap and you will be wrong, because these things must happen. The word there carries the sense of necessity, of the ordinary machinery of a fallen world simply doing what it does. He is describing background noise. He is describing the baseline, so then read the sentence that follows with fresh eyes. Because it is doing something the previous sentences were not. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. What most translations flatten is that last phrase, in various places. It reads like a throwaway, like the writer needed somewhere to put the earthquakes, and reached for the vaguest possible container. Two soft English words, easy to skip, and virtually every reader in the English-speaking world has skipped them for 400 years. The Greek is katatopos, and it is not decoration, it is the condition. The construction is distributive. It does not mean somewhere. It does not mean in a few spots. It carries the force of place after place after place, scattered across, spread throughout, occurring here and here and here and here. It is a word about geography and distribution, and it is the only qualifier Jesus attaches to the entire list. Stop and consider what that means. Out of everything he could have specified, the size, the death toll, the severity, the duration, the single modifier he chose was about where, and more precisely, about how many wheres at once. Notice what the text still does not say. It does not say the earthquakes will be stronger. It does not say the famines will kill more people than they used to. It does not say the wars will be worse than the wars of the fathers. There is not one word about magnitude anywhere in the passage, not one. And every generation that failed measured magnitude. Let that land, because it is the autopsy of 19 centuries of error. They were not lazy readers, they were faithful, desperate, sincere readers with the right text and the wrong instrument. They held up a ruler when the passage called for a map. They asked, "How bad is this?" when the text was asking, "How many places at once?" Every prophecy hunter who stood in the ashes of the worst catastrophe of his century and declared the end had come was answering a question Jesus never asked. The evidence, when we lay it out plainly, points in one direction. The signal was never severity. The signal was distribution. The signal was simultaneity. And now the uncomfortable part. If the sign is distribution, then intensity is completely irrelevant. 100 small tremors scattered across the whole face of the earth in the same season would satisfy the text. One catastrophic quake that levels a great city and kills 250,000 people would not by itself, not according to this passage, no matter how much it feels like the end while you are standing in it. That is not a comfortable idea. It means the events that most look like the end are not the sign, and the sign, when it comes, may look like nothing at all. It may look like an ordinary week. It may look, in fact, exactly like the world you already live in, which is precisely why you cannot see it. But it raises the question that the entire discourse is built to force you to ask. Why would God design a sign that has nothing to do with how bad things get? Why would the measure be spread instead of strength? That is not how humans build warnings. Every warning system we have ever invented, every alarm, every siren, every scale, measures magnitude. Louder means worse. Higher number means run. Heaven built a warning that ignores magnitude entirely. There is a reason, and the reason is buried in a single word at the end of that verse, a word every English Bible renders correctly and almost every listener misunderstands completely. Because there exists exactly one process in all of human experience, one, where the strength of any individual event means absolutely nothing, and where the only thing that carries any information at all is whether the events are arriving together. It is the metaphor Jesus reached for, and it is not a metaphor about the end of anything. All these are the beginning of birth pains. The word is Odin, and the original language reveals something startling the moment you stop reading it as poetry. Every English Bible gets it right. Birth pains, labor, the contractions of a woman delivering a child. The translation is not the problem. The problem is that we hear it as a figure of speech, as Jesus reaching for a vivid image the way a poet reaches for any strong picture of suffering. We hear pain and we file it next to torment, next to anguish, next to the other words for things that hurt. That is not what he was doing. He was not describing how much it hurts. He was describing a mechanism. And his audience knew it instantly because they had a category for it that we lost. The rabbis called it Shevlei Mashiach, the birth pangs of the Messiah. It was not a phrase Jesus invented on that hillside. It was already a technical term in Jewish thought, already discussed, already carrying a specific freight. When he said, "the beginning of birth pains," to Galilean men in the first century, he was not composing an image. He was invoking a doctrine they had heard argued in synagogues since childhood. He was saying, that thing you have a name for, that, it is starting. But now, examine why the metaphor is surgical, because this is where the whole passage finally opens. Ask any woman who has delivered a child, or any physician who has stood at the foot of that bed, how you distinguish real labor from false labor. It is one of the oldest diagnostic questions in medicine, and the answer has never changed. It is not the strength of the contraction. False contractions can be strong. They can be strong enough to wake a woman at 2 in the morning, strong enough to send her to the hospital in tears, strong enough to convince her and everyone in the car that the child is coming tonight. And then they stop. They fade. She goes home. Sometimes this happens for weeks. A single violent contraction on its own carries no information whatsoever. It proves nothing. It predicts nothing. So what distinguishes true labor? 3 things, and only 3. The contractions begin arriving together, a coordinated pattern instead of scattered, isolated events. The intervals between them shorten. The pattern tightens, compresses, accelerates. And they do not reverse. False labor retreats. True labor never goes backward. Once the body has committed, there is no path that leads back to not being in labor. There is only forward, and forward has exactly one destination. Now read the verse again. Nation against nation. Famines, earthquakes, in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains. Every element that seemed vague snaps into focus. He is not telling you the contractions will be violent. He is telling you to watch for the moment they start arriving, in coordination. He is not measuring pain. He is measuring pattern. The whole discourse has been a lesson in obstetrics, and 19 centuries of readers heard a lesson in disaster. And when we cross-reference this with the prophets, the pattern is unmistakable, because Jesus was not the first to use it. As a pregnant woman about to give birth writhes and cries out in her pain, so were we in your presence. That is Isaiah, 700 years earlier. Why then do I see every strong man with his hands on his stomach like a woman in labor, every face turned deathly pale? This. That is Jeremiah describing a day of terror, and the image he reaches for is the delivery room. Writhe in agony, daughter Zion, like a woman in labor, for now you must leave the city. That is Micah, and watch what he does next, because he refuses to leave it at pain. There you will be rescued. Every prophet who used this image used it the same way, and none of them used it to describe an ending. This is not merely historical, it is prophetic architecture. The typology runs from Isaiah through Jeremiah through Micah and lands on a hillside in the 1st century, and every writer in that chain is pointing at the same thing. And then there is the word Jesus put in front of it. Arch. The beginning. We hear beginning as a soft word, a warning shot. Early days. Plenty of time. That is not the weight the Greek carries. Arch is the word for origin, for first cause, for the point from which a thing proceeds. It is the word that opens the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word. It does not mean a hint that something might happen. It means the process has commenced, the onset, the initiation of a sequence that is now running. Arche odinon, the onset of labor, not the possibility of labor, not a sign that labor may one day begin. The commencement of an irreversible biological process whose conclusion is not in question and whose only remaining variable is time. So the sign was never the event. Consider the implications carefully, because this is the hinge of everything. The sign is the system entering coordination. The individual earthquake means nothing, exactly as the individual contraction means nothing. What means everything? The only thing in the entire passage that carries any information at all is whether the events across the whole body of the earth have begun arriving in the same window. Which forces a question that no one on that hillside could have asked. A question so obvious that its absence from 2,000 years of commentary is itself a kind of evidence. To detect labor, someone has to be able to feel the whole body at once. A contraction in the left side of the womb and a contraction in the right are only a pattern. If a single observer perceives both in the same moment and holds them together, separate them. Put one observer on the left and one on the right. Let each feel only his own side, never speaking to the other, and there is no pattern at all. There are only isolated pains. Each observer feels something ordinary. Neither one can possibly know that labor has begun, because the information does not exist in either location. It exists only in the comparison. So ask it plainly. What would have to be true about the world before a single human being could stand in one place and perceive that famines and wars and earthquakes across the entire face of the earth were arriving in the same window of time? Pause and consider what that question is actually demanding, because the answer to it is the reason no generation before this one could have fulfilled this verse, not through lack of faith, not through lack of watching, not through lack of catastrophe. They could not have fulfilled it if they had wanted to. It was not a spiritual failure, it was a physical impossibility. Here is the turn. And once you see it, you will not be able to unsee it in any prophecy passage for the rest of your life. For, in various places, to function as a sign, someone has to be standing in a position to see all the places at once. Simultaneity is not observable from inside a village. Read that sentence twice because everything rests on it. A sign that consists of things happening in many places at the same time is not a sign to anyone who can only see one place. To that person, it is not a pattern. It is just Tuesday. The earth shook, the harvest failed, the soldiers came through, and every one of those events experienced alone is simply life in a broken world. The information was never in the event. The information was always in the comparison, and the comparison requires a vantage point that no human being possessed. So consider what the world actually looked like for the entire span of Christian history. A man in the 1st century learns about the world at the speed of a walking animal. News travels as fast as a horse can run or a ship can sail with a favorable wind, and not one step faster. A famine consuming an entire people on the far side of the earth is not distant news to him. It is not news at all. It is nothing. It does not enter his awareness in his lifetime or his son's lifetime or ever. For him, that catastrophe simply did not happen. Now move forward 1,000 years. Nothing has changed. Still the horse, still the ship. A monk copying that very verse by candlelight in the year 1200, reading in various places, believing it with his whole heart, watching for it faithfully. That monk could name perhaps 3 or 4 places on the entire planet, and he had no way to know what any of them was experiencing this year. He could see his valley, he could hear rumors from the next kingdom, months late and badly distorted. The rest of the world was, for all practical purposes, not there. Move forward again. 1800. The horse is still the horse. Even in your great-great-grandfather's day, word of a disaster crossed an ocean in the belly of a ship over a matter of weeks. By the time he read it in a newspaper, the ground had long since stopped shaking and the dead were long since buried. He was not watching the world. He was reading its obituaries, one at a time, out of order, years apart. Do you see what that means? Every one of those believers had the verse. Every one of them had the Spirit. Many of them had more courage and more devotion than we will ever have. And not one of them, not one, in 1900 years, was standing in a position where the sign could have registered even if it had been happening in full force right in front of them. The signal existed. The receiver did not. The sign required a global observer. And for 19 centuries, the global observer did not exist. That is not a small claim. It means the passage contained a built-in prerequisite that the text never states out loud, a condition hidden in plain sight inside two English words, and that prerequisite silently disqualified every generation from the apostles to the invention of the machine you are holding. And then, within a single human lifetime, within the memory of people still alive today, that changed. Not gradually, not centuries of slow build. In a few decades, the entire human species was wired into a single nervous system. The ground shakes on the far side of this planet, and you know about it before the dust settles. A crop fails, a border ignites, a city empties, and the information is on the same screen, in the same hour, sitting 1 inch away from a report of something else, half a world away from the same day. You can watch 3 of them scroll past while you wait for your coffee. Stop and feel the weight of that. You are the first generation in the history of the world capable of perceiving the sign in that verse. Not the first to experience wars. Everyone experienced wars. Not the first to bury the hungry, the first to be able to hold the whole body at once and feel whether the contractions are arriving together. The vantage point arrived. And almost no one noticed because it arrived disguised as convenience. And now, before we go one step further, the temperature of this has to change. Because if you are feeling dread right now, you have understood the mechanics and missed the message entirely. Go back to the word. He said, birth pains. Of every image available to him, and he had the whole language of Scripture to draw from, Jesus reached for the single metaphor of suffering in all of human experience, whose defining feature is that it ends in joy. There is no other one. Every other picture of pain terminates in loss. This one does not. This one terminates in a room full of weeping that is not grief. He said it himself, in another room, on another night, days later. A woman giving birth to a child has pain because her time has come. But when her baby is born, she forgets the anguish because of her joy that a child is born into the world. She forgets the anguish, not because it was small, because of what it produced. That is the whole doctrine in one sentence. Labor is not the body breaking down. Labor is the body doing the most violent, most terrifying, most purposeful work it will ever do. And every scream in that room is a scream of arrival, not of ending. The pain is not the malfunction. The pain is the mechanism. It is what delivery costs. So the passage is not asking you to be afraid. Look at what it actually asks. Watch out that no one deceives you. See to it that you are not alarmed. Those are the 2 commands, and neither one of them is panic. One is a warning against being fooled, and the other is a direct prohibition against being terrified. The one posture Scripture forbids in this chapter is the posture almost everyone currently has, but there is something still unaccounted for, and it has been sitting at the edge of this from the beginning. Because if the arrival of a global observer is genuinely the first prophetic condition, the thing that had to happen before anything else could be read as a sign, then Scripture should say so somewhere, directly, not as an inference we constructed, but as a scene described. It does. There is a verse, and it is not in Matthew. It was written decades later by an old man exiled on a rock in the Aegean. And it describes the entire population of the earth looking at the same thing in the same 3.5 days and reacting together, reacting so much in unison that they send each other gifts over it. For 1900 years, honest commentators had to call that passage symbolic. not because they doubted the text, because reading it literally required a machine that would not exist for another 18 centuries, and they were being honest about what a human body can do in 3.5 days. That excuse expired within your lifetime. And when you finally read that verse plainly, when you read it as the man on the island actually wrote it, what it describes is not the horror you are bracing for. It is the reason all of this is happening at all. The man's name was John. He was old, he was a prisoner, and he was on a small island in the sea because the empire had decided he was less dangerous there. He had no maps of the whole earth. He had never seen a photograph because there were none. He had no way to conceive of an image traveling anywhere without a human being carrying it on his back. And this is what he wrote. For 3.5 days, some from every people, tribe, language, and nation will gaze on their bodies and refuse them burial. The inhabitants of the earth will gloat over them and will celebrate by sending each other gifts, because these two prophets had tormented those who live on the earth. Read it slowly. Read it as a description of a physical event, and watch what it demands. Some from every people, tribe, language, and nation, not a crowd, not a city, a representative sample of the entire human population, sorted by every category the ancient world had for describing everyone who exists, will gaze on their bodies. That is the verb. Not will hear about, not will learn of. They look, they see. This is an act of vision, not of report. For 3.5 days, there is the wall. That is the constraint that broke 19 centuries of interpretation. Consider what those two facts together demand of the physical world. Every people, every tribe, every language, every nation, looking at the same corpses on the same street, inside a window of 84 hours. In the 1st century, that is not difficult. It is not unlikely. It is not a matter of logistics. It is absurd. A man 300 miles away cannot reach that street in 3.5 days. A man on another continent cannot reach it in 3.5 years. The overwhelming majority of the human race did not know that street existed, could not have found the country it was in, and would have died of old age before a rumor of it reached their village. For the scene John describes to occur literally, every nation on earth would have to physically stand on one road at one time, and there is no road, and there has never been a road, and there is not enough time. So what did the commentators do? For 1900 years, they did the honest thing. They said it must be symbolic. Every people and nation must mean many people. Gaze must mean hear about. 3.5 days must be figurative, and they were not being faithless. They were being rigorous. They were reading a text that appeared to describe a physical impossibility, and the only responsible move available to them was to conclude the language was doing something other than describing. They did not lack faith. They lacked a category. The scene required a mechanism that had not been invented, and you cannot expect a man in the year 1400 to read a description of a live global broadcast and recognize it. He had nothing to compare it to. There was nothing in the created world that behaved that way. There is now. Every single constraint in that verse is satisfied casually by a world that already exists. Every nation, tribe, and language can now gaze at one street simultaneously. Not with effort, not with preparation. It happens by accident, several times a year, over things that do not matter at all. The 3.5-day window is not a limitation anymore. It is enormous. In the world you live in, 3.5 days is long enough for the entire planet to see something, argue about it, get bored of it, and move on. And the last detail is the one that should raise the hair on your arms. They will celebrate by sending each other gifts. John did not merely describe the whole earth seeing one event. He described the whole earth reacting to it as one crowd. A synchronized global emotional response, a shared mood, people who have never met and will never meet, joined together in a single reaction to a single image in real time. He described the psychology of a connected planet, from an island, in an era of horses. So now put the pieces together because they align into something almost no one preaches. The global event Scripture said would happen first is not a disaster. It is an audience. It is the moment the human race became, for the first time since a certain tower came down in a certain plane, a single room. One species, one screen, one shared instant. That is the event. That is the thing that had to arrive before anything else in the prophecy could operate, because every other sign in that discourse is a sign only if it can be seen globally and compared. Wars in various places, famines in various places, earthquakes in various places. Every one of them is invisible as a sign without a global observer, and the global observer is the event itself. The first sign is not the contraction. The first sign is the arrival of the one who can feel the whole body. And here is the inversion. This is what I have been holding since the first minute, and it is the reason this passage is not the death sentence people preach it as. The exact same infrastructure that lets the entire world watch a horror together, the only infrastructure in human history capable of putting every tribe and tongue in front of the same image inside 3.5 days, is the only infrastructure that has ever made this possible. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. That verse sits 8 verses after the birth pains. 8. In the same discourse, in the same breath from the same mouth, and it makes exactly the same demand as the verse from the island. All nations, every one. A message reaching the entire species. For 19 centuries, that was as impossible as the other one. The gospel moved at the speed of a sandal. Missionaries died on boats. Whole continents lived and died without a single syllable of it. Every generation of the church prayed that verse, and every generation had to admit that the world was simply too large and too slow. The world stopped being too slow. In your lifetime. Do you understand what that means? God did not build this stage for fear. Heaven has never once needed a network to spread terror. Terror was doing fine with horses. Fear was fully operational in every century of human history without any help at all. The one thing that was never possible until now, the one thing that required every nation and tongue to be reachable inside a single window of time, is the testimony. He built the room for the witness. The enemy just got to the microphone first. That is all that has happened. That is the whole of it. The stage was raised for a proclamation, and it is currently being used for a panic, and the church keeps looking at the stage itself and calling it the enemy. It is not the enemy. It is the fulfillment. It is the pulpit. And it means the screen in your hand right now is not a distraction from prophecy. It is the prophecy. You are not watching the sign. You are standing inside it. Think about what actually happened here. The same feed that brought the dread to you, the feed engineered to keep you frightened, scrolling, and certain the world is ending, is the identical feed that carried this message across whatever distance separates me from you, into whatever room you are sitting in whatever nation you are in tonight. That is not coincidence. That is architecture. The very verse that describes the whole world watching in horror is the same verse that guarantees the whole world can hear the truth. God took the machine, and He is using it for the only purpose He ever built it for. You did not find this by accident. So here is what stands when everything is being broadcast live and nothing is being understood. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Every headline you have ever panicked over is already gone. Every crisis that was going to end the world in your parents' generation is a paragraph in a book nobody reads. The feed forgets everything within 72 hours. That is its nature. It is a river of urgent things that stop mattering. The word does not. It stands when the broadcast ends, when the towers fall, when the last screen goes dark. Stand there, not on the feed, on the word, and do not be afraid of birth pains. He chose that word on purpose. Whatever else is coming, the only metaphor he gave for it is the one where the pain has a purpose and the room ends in joy. Something is being born. That is what the text says, and the text has been right for 2,000 years, while everyone reading it was wrong. If this uncovered something for you, tell me in the comments. I read them, and I want to know what landed. Hit that like button because it genuinely decides whether this reaches the next person. And subscribe to God Revealed so the next revelation finds you instead of you having to find it. And now, the most important thing I will say. If this whole message reached you tonight through a machine that Scripture said would exist, then understand why. The room was built for the testimony. The testimony is this: God became a man. He carried what you have earned. He died the death that belonged to you, and he walked out of the grave 3 days later so that you would never have to be afraid of an ending again. He is not asking you to be ready for the end of the world. He is asking you to be his. If you have never given him your life, do it right now, not at the end of the video. Now, say it out loud, wherever you are, and mean it with everything in you. I accept Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. If you said that, then something just happened that is more significant than anything in the news tonight. Type it in the comments so we can stand with you. Find a Bible-believing church this week. Open the book and start in John. The labor has begun, but labor was never the end of anything. Something is being born, and you were made to see it.